Bobby, we were talking about Max Domi and what, if it was in Philadelphia, the fans would be like, this guy's a hero. But what do you think the reaction of the Montreal people would be to that?
Yeah, you know what? I think if you were to stereotype fans, and that's always a bit of a danger, but I think generally if you were to stereotype Montreal Canadian fans, in large part they wouldn't love that, I don't think. And I'm not sure, but like you say, some fan bases probably would. In Philly, they go, yeah, good. In Philly, they'd say, hey, Ekblad should have fought him, come on. But in Montreal, I don't think they would. I think the majority of Montreal Canadian fans would say, you know what, we don't like that. That's not the way we think the game should be played. And its game certainly changed. I mean, from many years ago, and we used to have Wardo on the panel, and we used to joke about it all the time, but he got into it with Scotty Walker. And now, in his case, he was probably trying to antagonize Scotty just a little bit, but even so, he didn't want to fight Scotty Walker, but he had to know that back in those days, 10 years ago or whatever it was, that Scotty Walker's going to drop the gloves and pound you, and you better protect yourself or get into that mode. But the game has changed so much since that play happened that, nobody's saying Aaron Ekblad, and I haven't heard anybody. And if they have, I think the game's just changed. If you don't want to fight, you don't have to fight anymore, and you're not expected to. And Ekblad wanted nothing to do with him, and Domi needed to and should have realized that and just backed off. And I saw Claude Julien's comment today, and I think he was trying to defend Domi, and it actually, in my mind, made it a little bit worse. He goes, well, there's some history there, some stuff going back to junior hockey. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not good, because now it looks like it's even more premeditated as opposed to just a spur-of-the-moment thing where you kind of got slashed a little bit in the corner from Ekblad and you're ticked off and you want him to go and he doesn't want to go, so you pop him. And then you find out, well, they've had a running battle back to junior hockey, which kind of even probably makes it a little bit worse. And not that the suspension counts for anything, because it doesn't.
Well, I think this example really amplifies the crossroads that the NHL is presented with here, because you're right. I mean, it's not 1978 anymore. If you don't want to fight, you shouldn't have to fight. Fans don't expect you to fight. The media certainly doesn't expect you to fight. And I don't think the NHL wants to promote this. They shouldn't promote it. They don't promote it. But I'm not convinced, Bob, that internally the reaction to what happened last night matches what we're seeing on social media and from the fans and, moreover, from the media. And what I mean by that is I think there's probably people, and I don't know this, obviously, for certain, but I'm guessing. There's probably people in the Florida organization that didn't like what they saw last night, not because of what Max Domi did, but what happened with Aaron Ekblad. And they would look at it, the old school hockey guys would say, you're 6'4", 220, and you let that guy pop you like that? And that's the crossroads the league is dealing with here, because publicly they want to put forth the front. But I'm not convinced everyone that actually makes the decisions in the game feels that way.
No, I think you're probably right to some extent, although I think with each passing year it becomes more and more of a minority. And maybe at some point a minuscule minority that feel like that. But there's no doubt. And there are some fans that feel that way. There are some fans that feel like, hey, if a guy grabs you by the sweater and starts ragdolling you and scruffing your face with the glove, that you should defend yourself or go. But the values or the norms of the game have changed. Some people would say for the better. Some people would say for the worse. But, Max Domi had to know that what he was doing was in 2018 going on 19, he's 100% in the wrong, and Ekblad's 100% in the right. And Ekblad, he's got a concussion history, not a good one. That's a dangerous play for him, and he probably doesn't want to get involved in extracurriculars in a preseason game, an early preseason game at that. So, and then it comes back to the punishment isn't a punishment at all. And, the National Hockey League's got to do something to address that. They put the same similar value on preseason games as they do on regular season games. But we also know that when there's a suspension in the playoffs, they do the exact opposite, and they say, it's playoffs. It's really important. So nobody knows what exactly the factor is, but it's like 2-1 or 3-1 or 4-1 or something like that. You get a 1-game suspension, and it happens to be a game 6 or a game 7, an elimination game. That quite often is worth 3-4 games in the regular season. Now, there are a lot of people who think that's just asinine, that a game is a game is a game, and if you get 3 games during the regular season for a penalty, for an infraction, you should get 3 games in the playoffs. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but I also understand the rationale for rational human beings who say a game is a game is a game.
We all know that was going to be a suspension. Do you think on any level it was compounded with the fact that his last name was Domi and the dad, tied to his father?
No, not really. I think the act is the act, and I mean, right away, as soon as you saw it, you're like, well, that's no good.
I agree.
Suspension. It could have been, Prince Charles. It could have been Attila the Hun, and at the end of the day, it's just a bad play. And I think the only other time Domi's had a suspension was for an instigator late in the game, which is an automatic. It's not like he's had a checkered history with supplementary discipline. So, but nevertheless, it's complicated. The whole suspension thing gets further undermined by the fact that they don't make any money, and there's no financial penalty.
Well, exactly.
So he got the balance of the preseason. It doesn't cost him a single cent.
But that goes both ways for me, Bob. I mean, I could see players being like, you know what, if I'm going to be in a position where I'm playing aggressively, and this was stupid. This deserves a penalty. I'm not saying that it doesn't. But I could see the Players Association being like, you know what, then forget it. We're done. The players don't get paid. So why would I play? Like, if I'm a vet, why is Patrick Marleau obligated to play in the preseason? He's not even getting paid.
Yeah, well, then it would just, the NHL would come back and say, okay, well, fine, now we'll incorporate it somehow. But you've got too many guys that don't end up making the roster, so that's why. But you're obliged to play the preseason games. It's in the collective bargaining agreement, and so it goes. But they got to figure a way around this, because it just looks silly when you suspend a guy for the balance of the preseason. And as I say, if you're a player trying to make the Montreal Canadiens, then that's a significant suspension, because it just costs you a chance to make the team. So it doesn't always end up being a totally worthless suspension. But in the case of Max Domi, outside of the penalty to the team not being able to use Domi for the rest of the preseason and try to get their line set, it's not a huge. I mean, there's 5 games left. I'll bet you Domi was probably going to play in 2 or 3 of them, if that, probably. So it's not even a 5-game, because he wasn't playing every preseason game. So it was probably a 2 or a 3-game suspension in the preseason with no financial penalty. And as I say, the league just looks silly. But again, and people are on player safety, and I understand that, but I think that direction has to come from the general managers or hockey ops or Bettman or somebody that says, okay, well, we haven't ever done this in the past, but from now on, if you get a suspension in the preseason, we're just going to do it with regular season games, not preseason games.
Yeah.
But until player safety gets that direction from the guys that run the league, I would assume that's not a decision they could just make arbitrarily. They would need direction on that, and the PA would have to get involved. And again, that's where the PA represents Max Domi and the PA represents Aaron Ekblad. But when there's a hearing, the PA's in there saying, let's keep this suspension as low as possible, or let's not have a suspension.
Right.
And that's always been sort of a weird dichotomy, because, as I say, they represent the victim as much as the perpetrator, but they always seem to advocate on behalf of the perpetrator. And if I was the victim, I'm not sure I love that, but that's kind of always the way it's been.